You can continue the discussions after this session, because we have great lineup of speakers waiting for you to share with you. So please. Okay, I guess we'll start, and then hopefully what we're saying will get the attention of everyone. So again, very happy to welcome you here for this session. We'll be speaking about policy perspectives, and we have amazing lineup of speakers with us. Catherine Magnon from the European Commission, Deputy Director and Head of Culture Policy Unit from DG Education, Youth, Sport and Culture. Heidi Meissnitzer, who's the Cultural Attaché in the Permanent Representation of Austria. And she's also a co-chair of Open Method of Coordination EU Member States Expert Group on Working Conditions. So very happy to have you, Heidi. Then Sylvia Amann, who's the Senior Expert of the Creative Flip project and herself also a consultant with inforelais company. I hope you want the French pronunciation of it, inforelais. Happy to have you, Sylvia. And last but not least, Gabriele Rosana, who's the Director for Culture Action Europe. So I'm very happy to have you all here. We're going to discuss the policy perspectives of what was already said this morning. We're going to elaborate on some of these points already raised. We'll try to very practically see what we can understand by all these expressions that we've been hearing a lot: bouncing forward, building back better, resilience, and so on. So yeah, very happy to be here with you. I think I will start with Catherine as the representative of the European Commission. Director Tamás Sucs in the morning already spoke about what has been happening on the European Union level to help culture and creative sectors affected by COVID. But I would like to ask you, Catherine, personally and quite subjectively, what do you think were the biggest achievements of some of these measures that were launched? Please go ahead.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. So pleased to be here with you, and amazing that we can meet physically again. We're not used to that, right? I mean, there is this sense of déjà vu. I mean, I've been here. It was 2 years ago, or more than 2 years ago, and time has passed and has not passed. I mean, it's so strange. And I had even forgotten that at conferences, you get tote bags. When I saw tote bags this morning, I was surprised. Okay, so to come back to your question, Maciej, our biggest achievement, I think for me, has been the rapidity and the multiplicity of the Commission's answer. I will now only speak about, the Commission. We have Heidi, who can speak about the experience from a national government, and we have Gabriele, who I'm sure has an opinion on member states. I want to focus on the EU institutions, and the crisis that we went through was a first, of course, for everyone. And I've been impressed by how we have been able to answer fast and again with a whole gamut of instruments. And that made me a bit happy with, our institutions. It's so easy for journalists to speak about bureaucracy and stuff, but actually we put things together quickly. So what did we do? Well, first, easing the state aids, regulation. That allowed national governments, that allowed countries to subsidize as much as they wanted their cultural and creative sectors. And there were hundreds of such subsidies that went through us. We saw them. We, of course, always said yes, of course, no objections. But they went through our desks, so we could see, how impressive they were and how quick they were from all governments and for all or most sectors. Then, of course, that's not the most interesting, but of course, as you know, for Creative Europe, but for all the other programs as well, we managed to, insert a dose of flexibility, extend contracts duration, make amendments. That's boring, right? But yet the machine worked. And adapted to the difficulties that the sectors were facing because they could not perform as usual. And then the new thing that was brought was the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So I mean, there is also React EU, etc. But let's concentrate on the RRF because that's an innovation. So as you know, it's a mix of grants and loans that was put together extremely quickly by the Commission and the Member States. And let's have a look at what it brings for the cultural and creative sectors. Okay, as you know, there were calls from the Parliament and civil society to reach 2% of national envelopes for the cultural and creative sectors. We know now that those 2% were reached on average. If we take everything together and divide by the number of countries, we reach 2%, but not for each country. Still, it's a huge amount of money for the cultural and creative sectors. It's between 8 billion or 10 billion, depending on how we count. But if you look at, let's put the figures in perspective. So, in the next funding period, 2014-2020, under the regional funds, which can fund infrastructure, we calculate that's roughly 6 billion euros went to cultural infrastructures or cultural projects. 6 billion euros, ERDF, the past 7 years. Now, RRF, we have between 8 and 10 billion euros. So you see the magnitude of the figure, and that comes totally on top of everything else, on top of new ERDF money, on top of Creative Europe, whose budget has increased, on top of Cluster 2 in Horizon Europe, where we managed to have 2 billion for culture and the creative sectors. So, okay, maybe it's never enough. Maybe we can look at the glass half empty, but we can also look at the glass half full. And so that would be my, I would like to conclude on that. The multiplicity of the answer, we went fast and we innovated. Yes, possibly we could do things even better, but that's not bad. And I want to finish on one thing and link back to what we heard this morning. What I find extremely interesting in the national plans we received for the RRF is the fact that some measures are there that before COVID we could not even have dreamed of having, meaning, and I want now to refer to the Austrian initiative of fairness to address the pay gap. Working conditions of artists, pay issues were almost impossible to discuss in a big way before the crisis. I mean, now we can, because of course, because of the suffering, because of what happened, unfortunately, to the sector. But we see a number of countries that take this seriously and much more seriously, and with real experiments or real thinking done. And you see that through the RRF, like the Czech Republic has decided to work on the legal status for artists, and in the RRF, they have set aside 27 million euros to accompany this legal status with funding and grants for skills and other measures. So there are interesting aspects in what we've put together.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I must tell you, of course, I feel very personally strong about your words and some of the things you spoke about. Just to let you know, until autumn last year, I was actually part of the European Commission, and I was for 6 years in the team of Catherine. Now I'm actually representing more the civil society part in the European Cultural Foundation. So I also believe it's very much about these different perspectives that we all have, again, coming from civil society, culture, and creative actors on the ground or different institutions. So that's why I'm also very happy to have all these different perspectives here. And after Catherine, I would like to move to Heidi now. So we already heard this morning about the inspiring process, fairness process happening in Austria. But I would like to ask you more specifically about the insight into the OMC group that you're co-chairing. As I understood, it's your first meeting physically since you started your work last year, right? So maybe you could give us some insight about how the process looked like, because you did start in the middle of COVID, you're continuing your work. What are, let's say, some of the points you could share with us about where you are now and where you want to go, let's say, in coming months?
Okay. Hello also from my side to the audience here and also to the audience online, online audience. I'm very pleased to share this OMC group. I'm sharing it together with Ireland. Unfortunately, Toby couldn't be here. But I'm delighted to give you now an update where we are and what are we expected to come up with. Maybe a few remarks to the OMC process, because it's a well-functioning informal working methods where member states cooperate on jointly identified topics and of shared interest. And under the current work plan of culture, which is the strategic basis on which member states decide to work on, the status of working conditions, the status of artists and working conditions was identified as one of the priorities. And as Catherine already mentioned, there is a political momentum for this topic, and it is receiving highly topical attention, not only from our side, but also in many other institutions, also from the European Council, UNESCO, but also from the stakeholder sides. And the initiatives are also going on in the European Parliament, which we are following on, of course. So the basis for us is a mandate. It's also important that it was worked out by the Commission and then adopted by member states and discussed by member states. So there was already quite a very good input and a very good basis. Before the mandate, the Commission launched a study which gives us also a lot of qualified input and data on this topic. So we are expected to come up with a report. We have approximately 1.5 years. So we started in last September, and as it was mentioned, unfortunately, it was still under COVID circumstancing, so we couldn't until now we couldn't meet in person, but we had 3 online meetings. But what I also can say that the importance of this topic is also reflected in the fact that 27 member states have committed to participate, and not only from most of them from the experts are coming from the cultural ministries, but some of them are also from the social and labor ministry, which is an added value, I would say, to this topic, not to reflect on it from the cultural side, but really also from the social and labor expertise. So we had so far 3 meetings, and as the topic is quite complex, and the issue as such is a transversal issue, so we have to coordinate with some other policy areas, and also with the stakeholder sectors, what's going on the European level, but also on an international level. And many initiatives are underway in the member states, and of course this is due to the fact and the response to the crisis. We have now split it up in our last meeting. In our 3rd meeting, we split it up in 6 subgroups where we will now focus on. And so the first one, I hope I have certainly in mind. So one of important sub-area is the status of artists and how it is defined, who is part of or who could be defined as an artist, and what initiatives and approaches are already applied in member states. There is also we have heard it from the European Parliament. They are interested in a European framework for a status on artists. Then another important issue is, of course, how to finance the financing and regulatory issues. Then we are very much dealing with the social protection systems and how they are also financed, what's going on there. Then we have a subgroup on skills and another one which is on the artistic freedom. We invited already some, of course, external speakers, and we are working with other relevant DGs in the Commission together. And we had some presentations of good practices. One, of course, was the Austrian one. And but we are still looking for member states are invited to come up with also other initiatives, ongoing initiatives. The Fair Practice Code from the Netherlands was already mentioned, and Austria was very much inspired by that. But we also had on a welfare, on a social protection system from Germany on the federal level, and very inspiring project. And also from the co-chair from Ireland, there is a pilot project on a basic income for artists, and they are still struggling with clarification of quite a lot of questions where we are also working on it, but it's interesting to following up this project. And Luxembourg presented an initiative which is mainly only for artists, because we have a broader perspective and with also the cultural and the creative professionals. And interesting is always where's the money coming from, and certainly the cultural budgets are, on the longer perspective, it's not enough. And so we have to look for ideas and initiatives where the money can come from. I would also like to mention that in a few member states, social reform programs are underway within the Recovery and Resilience funds, which might also be inspiring for our groups. So after 3 meetings, and I mentioned that 27 member states altogether, we are more than 40 experts, and I can say there's a very good working spirit, and experts are really committed, and I'm very optimistic that we come up with a good and final report, and I'm very happy that some of the experts are also here and could make it to Brussels. And
much, Heidi. I think it might be the first time ever in this open method of coordination process that we have an expert group working on such a hot topic, actually also witnessing parts of this difficult reality unraveling in front of our eyes. So again, thank you very much for your work, and yeah, I'm happy to know that also some of these experts are today with us in Brussels. Now I'd like to go to the civil society and to Gabriele. So Gabriele, what we were just talking about, it's part of the daily bread of Culture Action Europe, if I may say so. I'm sure that the topic of working conditions has been on your agenda probably long before COVID. It's probably even more now. I would like to ask you, what are your expectations? How do you assess actually the progress being made on the EU level? What are your wishes? What are your expectations? What you hope for? Maybe you have also some comments to what we heard from Catherine and Heidi.
Thank you, Maciej. Indeed, it's our daily bread, and it's a bread for all tastes, from pumpkin seeds to turmeric, if I may say so. Given the wide range of topics we deal with at Culture Action Europe, first and foremost, also I would like to thank Creative Flip for giving us the chance to be finally off screen after 2 years, to reconnect with familiar faces. Culture Action Europe is a European cultural network, is the major European cross-sectorial cultural network, and I think it goes without saying that also seeing it from the perspective of a network, this is precisely one of the key conditions to build back better, or to bounce forward, to use indeed the buzzwords chosen by the Creative Flip project. It's indeed inspiring to speak after Catherine and Heidi, and after also having heard updates on the process at the OMC group. I was lucky enough to join, also to participate in part to one of its meetings together with Elena Politseva from ITM. We presented also the Voices of Culture report precisely on the topic of working conditions of artists and some policy recommendations stemming from that process. First, one comment indeed on what Catherine was saying. I mean, we've seen 2 years after the outbreak of the pandemic, I think also seeing it from the civil society, we have to commend the actions that has been, the unprecedented action that has been done by the European Union institutions. The very first time we have seen, and I think that indeed as European political actors ourselves, we have to recognize that the first time that we have seen an ambitious fiscal solidarity put in place by the EU member states, led by the EU institutions. On the topic on working conditions, also building on some of the suggestions, well, from before, from the Austrian case and from what Heidi was saying, it has always been a priority for Culture Action Europe, and I tend to describe this as a Karsic river, because, I mean, it was a topic that has always been there. I mean, the European Parliament, last time it voted a resolution on this topic, it was 2007. It was a whole other world. It was before even the Lehman Brothers bankrupt and before several other crises that we have been confronted with. The topic has always been among our priorities, and it is even more now. Of course, as we have heard also from the words of Sabine Verheyen, the increasing attention for the topic has been linked to the pandemic. We know, I mean, last year we've heard the figures of how much the pandemic, we didn't really need figures, we all knew that already, but the figures, of course, indicators help in that, how much the pandemic has impacted the culture and creative sectors. It's absolutely urgent then that this topic stays in the political agenda, and I mean, I think we are seeing already a sort of more ambition also in the way we are openly speaking about the subject. We are openly speaking with the Parliament has overwhelmingly endorsed the proposal for a European status of the artist. But of course we acknowledge it's a cross-cutting issue. It's an issue that brings together culture and social affairs and social issues, so it's very much important that the discussion itself is happening, bringing together both expertise and bridging between the two fields. What the OMC can do, what it's doing, what I'm happy can also steer the debate and provide guidance on precisely the issue of the definitions and also identifying the perimeter of the action of the EU on this topic. We, of course, are not blind to that. We are speaking of two domains that are not falling under the very primary competences of the European Union, but at the same time, especially considering the non-standard forms of employment that we see in the culture and creative sector, a sector that is highly mobile, that employ a lot of freelancers, and considering the specificity also of the labor intensity of the artistic work, we believe that this discussion should happen, and as it is happening, at the European level, in order to rebalance indeed a sector that has been more and more constrained in a project-based and output-driven environments, and that probably, we believe, deserves regulatory quantum leap also to take into account all that makes the cultural employment, which is indeed not just the cultural output, but also let's think about all the research and everything that comes before that as well. Two more comments reacting on your question, what we do expect and how we do expect that to happen. In 1 year ago, we contributed to the political process in the European Parliament, in the Cult Committee, by developing, together with the researcher Mafalda Damaso, some policy recommendations, indeed binding legislative and non-legislative tools, medium and long-term perspectives on what a European framework for the status of the artist should be, going from the digital environment, from topics like buyout contracts to lifelong learning, and setting minimum requirements, minimum standards for a truly European status of the artist. there was one topic, was the first topic that Catherine mentioned. It was mentioned also before during another presentation, that of state aid and the big shift that we are seeing in competition law at the European Union level. It used to be a rock-solid reserve of action for the European Union institutions. We are now seeing, and we are very much looking forward to seeing also the developments on how collective bargaining for self-employed people can be finally put in a European framework, and what guidance can be given to the member states to finally enable that. One last thing then on how to do that. Well, on the work plan for culture, we've heard that from the next work plan for culture. We've heard that from the French presidency of the council. We believe this topic should stay in the next work plan for culture, and actually also seeing some more improvements in that hand. And on the other hand, on the political agenda, I think some good old dose of peer pressure is there to be welcomed. Catherine was mentioning Czech Republic. There is also Spain that has put the working conditions in its own recovery fund, recovery and resilience plan. At Culture Action Europe, we have done some monitoring, not only of the money, because that's just part of the picture, but indeed of the lines of actions that are included, relevant for culture, that are included in the 26 or the those of the 26 plans already presented that prioritize culture. Indeed, there are examples already there, and a benchmarking exercise starting from what is happening at the member states level can provide additional food for thought for building a European framework or a European status of the artist, if I can use the words of the Parliament.
Gabriele. We'll get to the work plan for culture also in a minute, but before we do that, to address a question to Sylvia specifically, namely on the buzz quite resilience used. I know creative flip. I'm not sure. I hope my microphone is. Seems to be some interruptions. We can share. That's a nice thing. I wanted to ask you the word resilience. I heard that in your community of practice of creative flip, you prefer to use the term of positive transformations. Maybe you could tell us more about that and how you see that transformation happening. And with this, we'll progress to discussing the future too in a second.
Thank you, Maciej. This is a longer story. First of all, I'm very happy to be again with you all after these 2 years, and this links directly to the topic, because in Creative Flip we reacted immediately to the new situation already in 2020. The one big project you all know is Creative Unite. The second thing we did was maybe not so visible, but we analyzed from the very beginning policy reaction to the pandemic. And we had a first paper already published in July 2020, where we've had a closer look to the immediate response from EU level and also from the member state level. And then in a follow-up study, this was outside Flip, but with some of the Flip partners, we did a study for the European Parliament on COVID-19 effects and also related policy recommendations. And then we reacted again in Flip with an additional analysis of the more innovation-related papers from mainly member states, but also from private initiatives. So in order to use momentum of the crisis also to innovate and to go further. So based on all that, we can already say that, and here I react also on what all my colleagues here on the panel have already stated, that the immediate reaction, the emergency response was great. Yeah, so also unexpected, and also in the dimensions we have seen, and also in the length of being able to provide again and again support programs, again and again support measures. But what is always interesting in these times of crisis, of course, and this is your business as policymakers, you need to react immediately, you need to respond to an emergency, this is completely clear. We in FLIP, we have the privilege to think also broader. And we see that also as our role in order to further reflect. And what can we learn now from this crisis, but also for other crises in the mid and long term. And in that context came up also this term of resilience, because all the time when then conferences took place, it was about the sector has to become more resilient. It's so important that we focus on resilience, and we started then this autumn with a reflection about resilience. And of course, if you dig deeper, you see that this is a complex thing. There is a lot of research also outside the cultural and creative sectors. And then we started also with a participatory process this January in order to reflect a little bit further. Is this really the right response? Should we now, out of a crisis, vein the force of resilience of the sector? And I think Gabriele mentioned already that we are having these non-standard workers, for example, in the cultural and creative industries. And we had this narrative in culture that we can generate growth and we can generate jobs, and we can that. That's proven, we have the statistics, we can that. But the question is also for what price? It's also that, of course, we at the same time stressed always the fact that our workers are very flexible. And this is the other side of a non-standard worker. It's a very flexible worker. But what about then the rights of this very flexible worker? And this came very clearly on the table. So during this pandemic, for example. But this means also that in that sense, we have to think further. And therefore, this made me then rather reflecting into a direction that maybe an overall narrative of resilience might not be the best answer for going out of the crisis. Maybe this concept of resilience, or maybe then also of sustainability, is much more valid on a more operational level. So to think what are maybe appropriate tools which we use, kind of institutions becoming more resilient, but maybe also to further empower people instead of making them more resilient, because this is a different story. Yeah, resilient means you are able to absorb each and every shock which is imposed to you. An empowered person is maybe someone who can also act proactively and then also work for the future. And this brings me to the next thing, because when we are in such crisis, we understand then somehow better that maybe what we have thought, achieved, or for granted is maybe not. And in that sense, I have the feeling that we have now a growing understanding that we are rather in a permanent transformation. First, we thought, especially in Europe, we are in very fixed frameworks. We are in structures which will remain the same forever. And now we learn, not only by the pandemic, but also by the recent events now in the last weeks, nothing is for granted. Things change all the time. It was a kind of false dream we had in Europe to think that we are in a safe space. It's not the case. So therefore, maybe also to learn now out of this crisis and of this experience to understand that we are always in transformation, sometimes in more rapid, sometimes in slower transformation, but maybe that our systems need to become transformation ready. Yeah? And then also to think, how do they do that? And this is also what we discuss now in the framework of FLIP.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Now we try to jump into the future a bit, and yeah, the talk of the town, Work Plan for Culture 2023-2026 of the Council, at least for some of us. So Heidi, what can you tell us? I mean, I know you're discussing with your Culture Affairs Committee colleagues. We heard from the French representative this morning on that. If you can give us some insight, that would be great too.
Yeah. Is it working? No? Yeah, it's working. Yeah, the current work plan is now coming to an end, and I think the Commission and Catherine will agree that it was really very intensive. But we also have to say that we have identified the right priorities, yeah? And I think we can all be very proud. And I would highlight a little bit the process, how it was developed, the current work plan, because I think, and this is shown by many initiatives when we are talking now in the cultural area, how important it is to work together and to involve all the main actors, yeah, from different areas, from different levels, and really to cooperate and to work together. And this we did, the current work plan was negotiated under the Austrian presidency, and we did it by a participatory method. And I hope it will be done also by the next and future presidency. But we were lucky because we convinced our authorities and we could organize an informal meeting, yeah. And this is not, of course, depending on if you get the resources for it. And for the current work plan is already evaluated, and I think it's also the relevance or how member states feel committed to the work plan is that 27 member states took part in questionnaires, and we got already a first feedback, which was very encouraging. And so that we have chosen the right priorities. I think there was also an agreement that the working methods are still the right ones. And there are already new ideas or some good ideas what should be what could be topics of future challenges, for example, cultural diversity in the digital area. I had the pleasure also to chair an OMC group on gender equality. I think this is still an issue, and especially with an intersectional perspective, and also taking into account digitization. I think the whole topic of digitization is something, but it came up. And as Sylvia mentioned, I think we should also still reflect on what the COVID crisis has shown us. There is a lot in it. So I'm very optimistic because the motivation and ambitions are high in the Council. Member states are really interested, and the work plan for culture is the right instrument, and also an OMC is the right instrument. Maybe what we should also focus more on is how to distribute all this expertise, because there's really very good reports on the tables, and this should be known, this should be used, this should be by policymakers considered, and so I hope that the Commission, maybe Catherine will add a little bit more, but the Commission is expected to come up with a more detailed feedback in June, and maybe France will start. And but the Czech Republic, the upcoming presidency, has to finalize it, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion of a new work plan.
Heidi, I mean, the expectations are also high, so I hope the ambitions and expectations will meet. And of course, there are more and more challenges. Catherine, speaking about things that maybe did not work that well, or maybe the gaps that there still exist for European Union actions, what can you tell us? What's in store for the Commission for the next few months and years in your planning?
Okay, so I actually wanted to comment on the work plan for culture, but as Catherine, not as a commission, because we are a collective body, and you know, I'm a civil servant, so things have to be agreed, you know, and validated before being transmitted officially. So we haven't reached that stage yet. We haven't had the opportunity to speak with our commissioner yet regarding, you know, what we could propose. So I'm now speaking as myself. So no tweets, please. It's an entirely personal reflection, but I think, you know, it was extremely useful to sit together today, and I see a mix of, I see two directions. You know, one direction are the challenges that culture and the cultural and creative sectors have been facing for the past 10 years and that all work plans have addressed so far. Digitization, skills, funding, new business models, gender equality, that remains, yeah? But it was developed quite a lot in the previous work plans for culture. And I see, and there is a new line of thinking and a new line of possible actions to be pursued, is how do we adapt our policies and thinking to the new crisis? And the crisis has been the COVID, that has been the permanent crisis of the climate change, and now the war in Ukraine. Three major it's not events, it's like, you know, systemic transformation that have an impact on our personal lives, and maybe we should take into account when reflecting on the future of cultural policies. So if we look at COVID and lockdown, it's of course the working conditions of artists, and I think that should remain really something we work on, absolutely. And I thought it was very interesting, Sylvia, to hear you. Is it better like that? I can hear myself. No? No? Is it okay? Sylvia, what you said, we should reflect on a permanent adaptation in a way. We will always be in crisis. There is, and I think it's so true, there is no stability to be expected anymore. There is more, you know, all those crises, but also the freelancing, you know, I mean, the destructuration in a way of the workplace. I mean, all that is very important. So that points to a sort of social direction, right? Social policies or employment policies. Plus près? Okay. It also speaks to cultural policies and mental health and well-being, right? Because we all rediscovered that we cannot feel good without culture during the lockdown, right? I mean, without reading films, listening to music, reading books, etc. So there is a lot to be deepened on the relationship between culture and well-being, culture and health. And now with the war in Ukraine, culture and trauma, we know that you have different tools, you have psychological therapy, but you also have therapy through arts, which apparently gives longer-term results, more sustainable results. So that could be one line of thinking. Then we've got the climate change. Here there are two aspects. There is the mentality aspects. Art and culture can help us digest changes and adapt to new thinking, new mentalities, new ways of doing, new ways of living. So there is that. And then the general aspect. But then there is also climate change impact on some sectors like cultural heritage. We are not ready, you know, we are not ready to protect our cultural heritage from floods, our coastlines from, you know, the sea rising. So much remains to be done in terms of being prepared. And then there is the war in Ukraine. You know, what does it say with regard to our values? What does it say with regard to information, fake news, but also, you know, arts can also contribute to telling a story, telling a narrative. So there is so much we have to think about of possible new directions because our world is changing and has changed drastically. So I see a mix of, you know, not all things, but, you know, structural things like digitization, of course, and skills. Of course, it continues, but at the same time, we have to take on board all these new dimensions. So, but again, speaking as myself, Nothing is validated. We haven't had the official, process, because all what I'm saying is just too much. We won't be able to tackle everything. So it will be a difficult prioritization exercise. And just to finish, with regard to your first question, what worked, what didn't work in our response? Of course, only time will tell, right? What were the right measures? And I think that's where civil society, our projects, and the academics as well are very needed to analyze, tell us what worked, what didn't work. Because, it's one thing to list measures and mention figures, and it's another one to analyze the reality. And we don't have that yet because we need time, basically. We need things to unfold in reality, but we will need your analysis. Very important.
Okay. Thank you very much, Catherine. And yeah, we're taking note that it's some of these personal thoughts. So we're even more grateful to have you here in this Creative Flip family. Now going to Gabriele and to what Heidi said earlier about the importance of certain top-down processes, bottom-up processes, and listening to the voices from the sector. How do you make sure that civil society is properly included in the discussions on these future priorities? And with this, of course, I would be very happy to link to the Cultural Deal for Europe campaign and movement that Culture Action Europe, together with European Culture Foundation and Europa Nostra, are pioneering. What do you see as a future for that initiative and some kind of timeline? We'll very much welcome your thoughts on some of these points.
Thank you, Maciej, indeed. Thank you also for asking me to speak about a bit of the Cultural Deal for Europe. I mean, we have heard a lot speaking until now about transformation and the adaptability for reacting to a changing world. I mean, not even speak of crisis, but rapidly changing world. I think that the Cultural Deal for Europe that we presented, indeed, together with the European Cultural Foundation and Europa Nostra, also in its capacity of coordinator of the European Heritage Alliance, we came together. We came together, we sat around, at the time was a digital table. Luckily enough, we are going to sit around a physical table very soon with our partners to indeed strategize for the future. But we sat around a digital table at the very beginning of the pandemic to indeed think of what a paradigm shift should entail for bouncing forward, indeed. That is the slogan also of today's conference, for bouncing forward, what we need. For sure, what we need, and I connect with the first part of your question, is listening to the voices of the cultural and creative sectors. 1.5 months ago, we had our policy conversation of the Cultural Deal for Europe, where indeed we asked our participants, around 800 participants, unfortunately only online at the time, connected. We asked, what would you see included in the next work plan for culture? We really believe that the next work plan for culture, I mean, it can be very much bureaucratic or technical, the slogan, the procedure, but we really believe it's the way to also to make cultural policy alive in the European political debate, and we want to contribute to that process. So we think really that the next stop for the Cultural Deal EU is really identifying those priorities that we urgently want to see featured in the next in the roadmap for European cultural policy for the next 4 years. And I'm very happy about the priorities that I've heard identified by private citizens, Catherine, if I can say so. So let's see how the process evolves. But indeed, the Cultural Deal EU has been at the very beginning very much focused on the recovery and also the economic recovery from the crisis. I mentioned before the mapping that also thanks to the members of the network of Culture Action Europe we have developed a few months ago on the national recovery and resilience plans, taking into account indeed the plans, and both the EU, the major EU funding and the national co-funding were provided. But at the same time, we saw something. I mean, the institutions, the Commission, also the Parliament, from time to time, like to say that the culture and creative sectors do not come together, do not do things together. Well, during the pandemic, we've set up an informal gathering, which is still happening, which is more than 110 cultural organizations that indeed came together to think about the future of cultural policies in Europe, and we have done several initiatives together. The question of sustainability is very much crucial to the cultural deal EU, both sustainability of the cultural practices, of the production models, and the cultural sector itself, as well as, democracy, the discussion about European values, especially even more pressing now in a war-torn Europe, where indeed, and I'm happy to see that Creative Flip and Creatives Unite has opened up a page where indeed the culture and creative organizations, we are seeing every day several of our members, our partners, asking for pooling resources and tools useful for the for Ukrainian artists, for artists at risk in general coming to Europe. So I'm happy that Creatives Unite can act as that platform. As you speak of timeline, indeed, Maciej, I said already the work plan for culture is going to be probably our main slice of the cake for 2022. But the campaign, the Cultural Deal campaign, let's not forget about that, was born in 2019. It was born in the very days, let's say, what came before the Cultural Deal was born, so also the partnership with the European Cultural Foundation and Europa Nostra was born at the very days of 2019 when a new commission didn't have a commissioner for culture. There was the campaign of Bring Back Culture, Madam President, that was successful. Then we had culture explicitly included in the title of Commissioner Gabriele. Well, so probably the next step, I would say, more medium term, is going to be in exactly 2 years' time, when in the run-up to the next European Parliament elections, to assess how much culture has been included at the center of EU policy making and what needs to be done in a with a new mandate, with the next commission. But the issue here is, and just a reading tip also for our audience, indeed, to mainstream culture across all the policies. This has been a long-standing slogan of Culture Action Europe, mainstream culture across the policy priorities of the Commission. And in that, I'm happy that indeed also valuable experts as Gijs de Vries has contributed to the Cultural Deal EU with his policy recommendations on how to indeed include culture in all the 6 political axes that the von der Leyen Commission has also for the next 2 years. And then it will be time to assess and rethink and readapt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. And now to Sylvia. We spoke about predicting the future. We spoke about working across the sectors. We had a very inspiring presentation also this morning from Lisa about knowledge and innovation communities. But I wanted to ask you very specifically about this foresight and forecasting, because how much can we really predict? Maybe there's a way also for culture and creative sectors that they can play a role in predicting that future. I don't know if this is something that you've been reflecting about, or maybe Creative Flip has been reflecting about.
As you know, this was part of our reflections also. So we referred then when discussing or analyzing this resilience debate, also you must be resilient then for what? And immediately you come to what other crises beyond the pandemic can happen. And then you end up with foresight papers. And then you start to reflect what has this to do with our sector. And so I think when we had a look at these foresight scenarios, it was not really a surprise, and it felt also not like an academic exercise. It felt as papers which were done seriously. And I've already used another foresight paper from 2017 for my first flip paper in 2020. So in that sense, European Commission tries to see the future for already quite a while. And you find what has happened. So in that sense, it seems that to a certain extent, you can at least predict or foresee scenarios, different scenarios. You cannot foresee that on 24th of February we will have an invasion to the Ukraine. But what we know for a very long time is that we are having a rapidly changing geopolitical context. And when we know that, for example, and then it's also your question, what matters that for culture? Of course, we, for example, concentrated many years on mobility programs. This is very nice, but if we are having more and more refugee artists, maybe we need an additional kind of initiative. And if we have a look at the foresight scenarios, we will know that we will have much more refugees. So this brings maybe a completely different topic onto the agenda. We can also see it from the other side. It depends on which foresight scenario you are looking at. Of course, you mentioned also before the climate change, and we had this presentation from the climate kick. So in climate change or ecological transformation, I've just published a paper on ecological cultural policy. It has, again, several sides. Yeah? So you can see it as a big opportunity also for culture. Because I do not see another way than the arts, for example, to reconnect people with nature. But if you want to have a new kind of understanding of how a human being is living on Earth, which is needed for really achieve a climate change, you need this new kind of way to interact with nature. And this is a big opportunity for the whole arts and cultural sector in order to go ahead. So in all these kind of future transformation, future does not always mean future crisis. It means transformation, and it has opportunities and it has challenges. And if we go ahead with that, it's, I think, a good way forward, maybe also for a new cultural policy, to think also in these dimensions, maybe with a kind of overarching ambition to be relevant for the society, to be one of the positive enablers and actors of the world and society in which we are living. And then it's also not a question about instrumentalization. It's being part of the game, of working together for a better future. And we have to co-define what is the better future. And then we are coming to values and to guiding principles, etc.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I think we can live with that as a bit of a conclusion, opportunities and challenges, because it's relatively positive. I'm now looking at Dubravka because I know we're a bit out of time, but this is where we normally foresaw some time for your questions. I don't know, Dubravka, what shall we do? Maybe we can have some, 3 comments from your side. I'm happy to go around to the microphone and just give you the floor like that, because I couldn't really see you before with that light. So if there anyone willing to comment? Or you're all that hungry? Come on, you need to give us something. We want to see a live audience. This is something we've been all missing, right? Yeah. Otherwise we go for lunch and you discuss that over lunch. But yeah, I see some heads nodding. Huh? Okay, so so that's good. Thank you very much for the speakers. A round of applause and enjoy your lunch.
Yes, I think we kind of caught everyone by surprise. Everyone, I think, is not used to anymore having the opportunity to raise their hand and ask the question, so that's totally fine. Luckily, we are here in person, so the speakers are here. You can ask them during lunch and, of course, continue the debate. With this, I just want to say goodbye to our online audience who has been following us since this morning.